So last week, Pastor Randy guided us in reflecting on our call to tithing. Essentially, we learned that all that we are given is not our own, but God's, given to us to steward and to care for. Remember the video that Pastor Randy showed the children? A man gives someone a dozen donuts and then asks for one to take on the road back with him. And yet the man who received this gift of donuts said, "Oh no, he needed to keep them all for himself." Remember that Pastor Randy asked the children if they would be willing to share a donut from those they've been given, and they said, "Of course." Now, they were a little more dubious on sharing Halloween candy, but we learned, the video illustrated for us that tithing is not giving to God from what is ours, but giving back to God what is God's. A tenth is not so terrible much giving in that sense of thinking. The goal then that Pastor Randy talked about was a transformed heart, which with gladness and thanksgiving gives back to God. So if that's the goal, to have a generous and transformed heart, one that gives to God what we're able to, what is the cause that we are giving to? For time and time again, I've seen it work out that people are much more willing to give to a direct cause than to some vague budget. It is much easier to give to the Red Cross or UMCOR in the wake of a disaster, of a flood or a tornado, or maybe to the Nature Conservancy or public radio because they provide education and services which we enjoy. So perhaps when we discuss money in the church, we need to talk about the cause. What cause are we giving towards? An easy assumption could be that the cause is the church budget. During children's time, I demonstrated the percentage of each dollar that goes to various ministries of the church. And this helps us to see the budget in more of a narrative perspective, and it came right from the envelope you received in the mail. With your pledge card, it also had a brochure that explained the money that goes to different parts of the church and where that fits under. And if you want more information, you can read that, or if you didn't get one, we have extras. This narrative budget kind of helps us focus not just on the rote dollars and cents, but also what those dollars and cents do. You can, we do this in order to give you a bunch of details and information because we want to be transparent and we want you to know where the money that you're giving goes to. And yet, the budget of the church is not the cause for our giving. But really, it's the ministry that the budget enables us to do. The ministry is the living, breathing presence of God which is made known in our world. Now, does that sound a little idealistic? Probably. But is it true? Yes. Our scripture this week, again, was from the second letter of Timothy, which Paul is writing to Timothy, which as a mentor writes to all of his mentees, helping this young fledgling pastor understand his call and how to live into it, how to work within the people in his church. Paul reminds Timothy to proclaim the message, be persistent, to convince and correct and encourage those whom he serves. Paul also reminds Timothy of those important people in his life. He reflects on, remember, Timothy, the people who gave you this faith and the learning. And that Timothy has learned that ministry is relational. Ministry is about the people. It's about the people who bring us to where we are today, those who've taught us and encouraged us and corrected us in our faith as Christians, and also the people who make up the church now as it is. Paul instructs Timothy further that the scriptures, the sacred writings of the time, were inspired by God. The Greek word here that is translated inspired, theopneustos, it's been a while since I've taken Greek, but I think I got close, is more literally translated as God breathed. There's a sense of the movement of the spirit, of wind, of breath in the second part of that word. So essentially, that which Timothy bases his ministry on has been breathed into being by God. This work of the Spirit is to be the basis of Timothy's work. which is probably an important lesson to this young pastor when he may be encountering a lot of complaining and squabbles among his congregation. The imperative to be persistent in the faith also rings true in this letter. Because what is at stake is not the sacredness of the writings of the scripture that Timothy preaches, but what its role is in Christian community. What is the purpose of the scriptures that we use each week? Paul says that they are there to teach and to correct and to train people to be good Christians and in the ways that God is wanting us to grow and live out in our community. So certainly, unless we take the scripture seriously, we have missed the point. For scripture is not really just a starting point or an ending point or a second-class resource to grab when we want or a last resort when things are tough. No, scripture is what informs the very way that we live and breathe in this world. For the same God who breathed life into us, breathed life into the scriptures. Finally, Paul tells Timothy not to wait for a good or convenient moment to do his teaching, but to carry out his ministry fully. There is an urgency to the work that Timothy and really that we are called to do. Paul warns that people will start seeking a comforting or convenient or popular or feel-good message, and they will seek out the teachers who will give them that. Timothy must not be discouraged. This is why it's important that he grounds himself in the scriptures, the sacred writings, and the teachings in order to stand in contrast to the lure of those false teachers. For the scriptures are not there just to be listened to when they are popular or convenient, but to be heard and struggled with even when they seem confusing or old-fashioned. And that message is not always going to be feel-good. So we too today must be vigilant against the lure of comfortable and popular and convenient teaching. And rooted in these scriptures, we know that the church has a future and that God has not abandoned us. Just like the Israel who Jeremiah was preaching to in our first reading. They may have been exiled, they may have been in a foreign and unknown land, and they may have felt that God had abandoned them. But Jeremiah's words to them were that God would show his faithfulness in a new and different way, in a covenant that be inscribed upon their very hearts. So despite those things in life which scare us, or despite whatever crazy stuff happening in the world, despite what research says or our own fears, despite the political climate or the environmental climate, we know that God has not abandoned us. And what we have is God-breathed lives and God-breathed scriptures to guide us. So our generosity is a sign of our hope in this great future. We give to causes knowing that they will continue to exist. No one's going to give money to something they know is not going to happen, or not going to work, or is going to tank after it starts. When we give as Christians, be it to the church budget or in other ways and spaces, we declare to the world that we will be persistent in our faith. And our faith declares to us that God will never abandon us, and is indeed a God who turns despair and death into resurrection. So when this church creates a budget, there is a time when those individuals who are called to serve on finance come together and discern, line by line, what the allotment of funds looks like for the coming year. Is this an exhausting process? Yes, and I'm sure you can ask some finance people, and they'd be happy to tell you the many hours it takes to put together a budget. Is it human and flawed? Yes, because we are human and flawed. But is this based in hope? I pray so. It can be tempting to absorb the fear and distress of the world in which we live and say that we cannot afford to fund certain ministries. And when we sit down and fill out our pledge cards, it can be tempting to think that we cannot give a certain amount because who knows what's going to happen when we might need the money. And before you hear all this and dismiss it as idealistic gibberish, let me say this. We are called to ministry now and to ministry today. Not to when it's comfortable or convenient, not when we have all the necessary funds and then some. Not to when we feel ready to do ministry, but now. And so our church budget is an examination of the resources we have and how we distribute them to best meet the needs of our community, both here within the church and outside. The cause we are giving toward is not the detailed budget, but is the needs of the world. We give because we believe that the world can change. So I pray that when our budget is created, that we listen and leave space for the Spirit to move within it. And I pray that when we sit down with our pledge cards, we do the same thing. We listen for God's Spirit to move within us. We have God-breathed scriptures, so why not a God-breathed budget or pledge card? One that we leave space for the Spirit to move and really listen to what God is telling us. Why don't we look at the needs of our community and have a budget that's inspired by that? So remember these cups here on the altar with their labels and the pennies and cents that go to different parts of the ministries. We had the building cup, which supports the space that we gather in. And the space that not only us, but the community gathers in, whether it's the preschool or Boy Scouts or support groups or the neighborhood association, local schools, or the many activities that our children, youth, and adults enjoy here. The administration cup allows us for communication about what we are doing and who we are as a church. Helps us send out the logos and make weekly bulletins and support the staff in the office and pay for all the copies and printing that we do, the paper and the record keeping, the very technical stuff that is necessary for this church to happen behind the scenes. We have the education cup, which supports the nursery and the preschool and the children, youth, and adult activities as we come together and learn and grow in community. The mission and outreach cup, which includes our tithes to the conference. This church tithes 10% of its offering towards the conference, which helps it run administratively and also support ministries and missions that the church supports on a broader level. And also then it supports our own missions here at church in small ways that we can reach out to those in our community and help them. We have the music and worship cup, which provides the time of inspiring worship that we come to every week and allows for people like our children and our youth and different adults to sing in choirs and to learn about music and how to express their faith with their gifts. And finally, we have the pastoral ministry cup, which supports the pastoral staff as we partner with everyone in the congregation and to lead, nurture, and embody Christian discipleship so that we can all grow in our love of God and of neighbor. Those are the activities, those ways of being and making Christian disciples for the transformation of the world. And that's for which what we give. The budget is a discernment tool. It's a tool that we use to help us do that in a good way of being stewards of the resources we have. The cause is different, though. The cause is the ministry that we are able to do because of our church budget. The cause is the transformation of the world, which is no small task when it comes down to that. The good news, though, is that God is breathing life into us each day and into our work that we do, helping us to discern how to best use our money, how to discern the practicalities of being in ministry to the whole community. So just like Timothy, we must be reminded that our ministry is a relational one. It's about people. It's not rooted just in the dollars and cents or fear that we have, but it's rooted in the people who came before us, the 60 years of West Heights, and much time before that. And it's about the people who are gathered here today as we come together in community to learn from each other, to encourage each other, to worship together, to pray for each other, to serve in missions together. This goes all the way from the elders who have much to teach us all the way down to the children who inspire in us hope for the future. We know that our lives in ministry are rooted in the breath of God. When we were formed, God gave us breath. God also breathed life and meaning into the words of Scripture that we read each week. These words are more than just ink on a page, but are words made alive by the Spirit of God. So we must not stray from the teaching and absorb the teaching of the world, one where we keep what is ours in fear of scarcity of resources. No, we trust in a God of abundance. There are many causes out there worthy to give to. And like Pastor Randy said last week, we will never say that the church budget is the only way to give. Yet the ministry here at West Heights is a cause as well. For it is a ministry in connection with Christians across the world, a mission to make and grow disciples for the transformation of the world. And through what we hope is the God-inspired church budget, we will stand for hope that the church has a future. Because God is in the business of resurrection, not death, love, not fear, community, not isolation. Our God is a God of steadfast love and grace. In that we can trust and we can have hope. Hope that the future is bright, and like Timothy, we can be persistent in our faith, challenging the world's fear and lack of belief, knowing that the God who gave us breath has not abandoned us, and that our future is bright. Amen. I invite you now to stand as you are able for our hymn, the Covenant Prayer, found in the Worship and Song Hymnal 3115.